Okay, folks, welcome to TechPowerUp 2.0. It's all about security. My name is Ashish Kumar Adhikari, and I am a lead principal manager with M365 engineering team. I'm up here to talk about security to you, and the session objectives today that we'll focus on for the next 40-45 minutes are how to manage risk and securing information and protecting your organization assets as you secure the information that your organization has. Now, this slide pretty explains, and you can see a lot of blobs there talking of data is exploding. Yes, in our own lives, uh, we are creating and consuming more data than ever before. There are different estimates from leading analysts, whether it is Gartner or IDC. The one that you see on your screen is by IDC, and they are predicting by 2025 there'll be 164 zettabytes of data. Now, I don't have to do a math. All I can say is the amount of data that organizations are creating is multifold. A lot of digitization has happened, specifically in the current times when people are working from home. A lot of digitization has been accelerated, given more automation is happening. Now, that presents a different challenge. That presents that you have so much of data. Hey, how would I run security encryption of the data? How do I ensure the data doesn't go into the wrong hands? And more important, what are the risks that get created if data is indeed going into the wrong hands? And you'll see, given a lot of these automation, there is a lot of regulations that also come into play, which you have to comply to with all this data. And how do I really ensure I am classifying my data, I am protecting my data, I am in line with the compliances that I have or my organization has to follow for the data. And that's where my talk would be around managing the risk aspect that you have. So the data regulations, as you see, are increasing around the world. For any companies that you are in, GDPR was the top of mind. And if I look around Asia, whether it is Thailand, whether it is Singapore, or it is Malaysia, most countries have their own personal data protection acts. There are also acts which were uh, created by the governments so that the consumers are protected, consumers' data are protected. But the bottom line is all across in Asia or all across in globe, the data regulations are increasing globally. And privacy is a topic which is becoming both a board member topic. It's also becoming a critical topic in the CIOs and CISO fraternity, where they are looking at how do they protect the privacy of the users, of the employees, of the customers, and be compliant. So that's a risk that most companies have to manage. And while I've heard from some of the customers in our engagement, we roughly believe, based on what we are tracking, close to 220, plus updates are coming from regulatory bodies. So you could be following a Singapore law, you could be following the PDPA law in Thailand, and even the governments, as these laws are made, are also changing them or updating them so that they can convey what they're expecting in much clearer terms. And as the technology, new forms come in, it's also critical that the governments and the regulatory bodies take a note of those new forms and are then able to communicate that, hey, you also have to add that new form, which results into a lot of updates. Also, more than 50% of organizations states that IT and cybersecurity risks are biggest concern for them today. And identifying most of these risks is a fairly time consuming task. And that's where we thought, hey, why not innovate the services in such a way where we able to give customers a way to manage the risk better. So if I have to sum up, what we see today is a keeping up with the new regulations, frequently updated regulation, and you saw a number of close to 220 plus regulations that keep on getting changed across the globe, across different regulations. So if I am a large company where I have many offices across the globe, it's fairly difficult to keep up with these changing regulations and keep a track of which organization, which government, which body has changed the regulation, and how do I now firm up with that. The second is most of the assessments that we do or we have are point in time assessments. And what we mean by that is if my organization has to comply to, let's say, GDPR, then what happens is I do that by working with a company. But also, what also happens is the assessment that I was GDPR compliant is done at a point T0. Or let's say I invite an organization, an auditor to assess that have I done right things on GDPR, have I done right things on PDPA or any other assessment that I'm interested on, they come and assess me. Today we are, let's say, in May, June timeframe, and I did an assessment in Jan, Feb timeframe. Between Jan and May, June today, hey, a lot of things would have changed in my infrastructure, but my assessment by my auditor was done in Jan. So it brings in a blind side because my assessments are not digitally getting updated. It's not a real time. And that's the second challenge that we believe that the point in time assessment failed to communicate the risks that an organization has versus a real time view. Also, what we have seen is when an organization has to become compliant, there's a lot of teams involved in that. There's a lot of fatigue involved in communicating with teams. You have to do this job to identity team. You have to put this control to, let's say, email team. These controls are pending with respect to a regulation to maybe security team or SOC team. Now, the risk and compliance team has a lot of burden on their shoulders to communicate with all the teams, track whether those respective teams have done the job, and then go back and update that, hey, as an organization, I'm compliant. And then the chief risk officer goes back and updates the board that, hey, today we are good. So we also wanted to innovate so that there is a way to have this communication between compliance team and different other teams done easily. And not only it's done easily, they all see the same picture of where they are on the compliance journey. And the fourth one, what we're trying to solve so that you can manage your risk better is guidance in what kind of controls should you deploy. And those are some of the challenges that we're trying to solve. So from a Microsoft perspective, we have this compliance manager as a service. It's available today for customers in their O365 subscription. And as you see the screen, the beauty of this innovation is we're trying to make organization uh, go compliance in ways which is fairly intuitive. We want to offer you all the assessments out of the box. And typically, when an organization goes and wants to get compliant, they pick up the assessments or they pick up the regulations which the legal department feels is in the best interest of the organization or the area that they operate on. And then they probably uh, kind of do the assessment with respect to that regulation. Example, a company in Thailand, if it has to go and be compliant with the Thailand PDP Act, they would want to assess themselves against what the PDP Act of Thailand states and then come back with the gaps. And that's what we're trying to solve in an intuitive fashion, where we're trying to give you a library which possibly has all the assessments which are relevant. So if you're an organization who had an office in Singapore and Thailand and India and Australia, what we're trying to do in attempt is where we give you a library which has all these assessment, and you could go and download these assessment fairly in minutes, so that you have an Australian assessment downloaded in your subscription, you have the Thailand PDP downloaded, you have some Singapore laws downloaded, and then the system actually tells you these are the activities, uh, what we call it as improvement actions you have to take on. And as you keep doing those improvement actions, or as your team keeps activating those controls, your score improves. And that's a kind of a gamification that we have brought in, so that across different teams, you can see a score of where you are on this compliance journey from a risk control perspective. And fairly, it guides you and navigates you in an intuitive management. It has built-in automation, and what I imply by that is there are certain things which Microsoft would have done for you, things like lockbox, things like encryption, some other controls which are done so that data center facilities access is secure, administration is secure, backups are taken. So there could be certain controls which regulations are expecting, but given that you're using a service and email as a service or a storage as a service in form of OneDrive for business, then there might be certain controls underlying operations of that service which are done by Microsoft. And that's where we are pointing at a built-in automation so that we can even tell you, hey, these are certain things that we have already done, so that they improve your compliance score, and then you're on a continuous assessment journey. And that's the kind of a goal, a business goal that we're looking with Compliance Manager. What I'll do is do a very quick view of how the Compliance Manager looks like so that you can look at the service. And if you look at my quickly change screen now, I have gone to compliance.microsoft.com, and I think it's fairly good to share with you there are different portals that Microsoft had, and now the thinking that's evolving is why not have all the compliance related services available at compliance.microsoft.com, and why not have all the security related services available at security.microsoft.com. So what I've done is I've gone to compliance.microsoft.com, which is home to all the compliance services, and I can quickly go here onto the compliance manager, what you see. And as I was trying to share with you, the business problem that we want to solve here is that I should be able to go, and if I'm a company which has a lot of offices in different countries, then can I just go and download the assessments? And as you see here, we pretty much have 333 assessments, and our goal is to, on a continuous basis, keep adding more. And if I have to very quickly take you through what assessments are here, you can see there is a data protection, ISO, NIST, Singapore, some APAC economic cooperation, some names related to Alabama, Alaska. You have Australian Public Record Office assessment. You have Australia Privacy, credit reporting, some more Australian Spam Act, energy sector, telecommunication. Then we go to Bahamas, Brazil, some other countries. I'm just picking the ones which are fairly known. COVID, California, Canadian acts, some US, some acts which are there, DEFAS, some EU acts, Estonia acts, Denmark, UK, Utah. And as you see, a lot of this, while I'm very quickly jumping between the assessment, CMMC level, different California Act C, which is fairly top of mind nowadays. FINRA, a lot of you're kind of interested in that. HIPAA high tech for pharma companies, for hospitals, for healthcare sector. and so on. ISO, bunch of them from ISO. So the idea is, let's say if I was really interested in HEPA, I could have just gone here and in a matter of seconds, the assessment would have shown up and I just download that assessment. And the beauty of this is you really don't have to kind of go to a long tail of engaging a consultant who will tell you what this assessment is. If you've gone through the HEPA high tech, it probably has different family of controls, and what you see pretty much here is administrative organization, you all of this, and all it takes is just create an assessment, and I could say, hey, this is an assessment for let's say Singapore hospital, and I use it a default group for this. I do next. Also, it says the template is already there. Singapore hospitals, and I go, and let me go and choose another assessment because there is already a custom one which I've made for this one. So let me go in this time, pick an Australian privacy credit rating assessment. Because in my assessments, I've already created one on HEPA. I do the same process. These are some of the control families. Obviously, with different assessments, you'll have different control families. I just go and say, let's say, big mining company, and just go with the default group, do a next, and create a assessment. So here the assessment is created. And let's say if I'm a company, I have an office in Australia, I need to be compliant to this assessment. I could go and now I know that how many points I've done. So there's a lot of controls here. I'm not looking very good here on the assessment, but that's the point so that you know where you are. And you see pretty nice graphics view of different control families. And what I can start doing now is go to the assessment of interest, look at the improvement actions. Let's say I want audit user query parameters as one improvement actions, which I want to assign to the IT team. I could assign an action to, let's say, Amy. She's my admin, and this now we're getting into the collaboration view of the assessment. So I have assigned it, and let's say if I log in as Amy now, in my Amy avatar, then I can actually in these tabs go back because I'll obviously get an email notification that you've been allocated this. I log in as Amy, and then I could set the implementation that, hey, after doing the job, it's implemented. I could put a date when it's implemented, put some notes, any testing, any evidences, and all of that. Once I save that this is implemented, you'll see the score of this goes up. So I achieve a point that you have taken an action, it's done now. And if I go back, then my actual score increases. So pretty much the idea is with Compliance Manager, we give you an environment which is uh, all the assessment out of library. You're able to download them. You're able to track what kind of score you have. And not just this, but you're also fairly able to go and allocate the actions to different team members, and those team members get notification. And once they've done the action, your score improves. And from a risk perspective, if you are a chief risk officer, you're a compliance officer, you pretty much can see how your organization is traversing through these different, I would say, regulations and compliances that your organization has to comply to. So with that, we are with the first part, which talks about the managing of the risk for an organization, and this is fairly linked to what I'll go to the next part, which talks about hey, how do I protect the information which I have in the organization? And if you look in your organization, you would have information scattered all across on-prem, in your SharePoint, in your OneDrive, in your SaaS application, possibly Salesforce, and in so many places. But hey, while we're talking of information protection, why don't we look at a big picture? Why don't we look at, hey, what's that we spoke about? So if you look this compliance management, this is what is reduces the risk. And let me use a pen so that I can highlight it as well. So when it comes to risk management, we focused on compliance management. I just showed you how compliance manager works, a quick view to that. And now of the big picture, if you are a Microsoft customer and you have O365 subscription, you are getting a benefit of lot of solutions in compliance. So in our discussion today, we'll be focusing on information protection, while the name says information protection and governance, and you'll see in my slides that how the protection is linked to governance, but the talk today would focus more on information protection. And just to see the big picture and complete the view, the Microsoft Office 365 subscription also gives you insider risk management. This again is a separate solution which gives you a fairly AI ML led view of what's happening in your organization so that you can protect insider threats. And you can also have a tab on different scenarios of are my employees doing certain risky actions? Uh, can I have a better insight if somebody has resigned? And so on. So that's a solution that we can talk at some other day. But just to complete a view, this is a solution as well. And then the old known discovery and respond, where you have e-discovery and response and retention management, records management, some of those solutions. So that's a big picture. But now for today, we'll focus more on information protection. The moment we talk of information protection, what comes to mind is, hey, I'm a large organization. I have my data, which is probably kept on cloud servers. I have my data, which is kept on file servers. I also have my data, which is kept on O365 in PDF format, probably in some AutoCAD drawings. I have some critical design patents, which are there. So what comes to mind as you think about this is, what's your strategy for protecting and governing all this data? And let's classify the data which comes to the mind automatically. And within classification, then what comes to mind is, hey, what's a kind of a sensitive data which I have? But before we go into the jargon, let's go to, hey, do you know where your business critical and sensitive data resides and what's being done with it? Who's using it, where it's kept, is it idling there? And do you have a control of this data as it travels inside and outside your organization? It's fairly important to understand once a data is shared between your employees, what happens then? And what if one of the employees shares this data outside your organization? Then what happens? And the other aspect is, are you using multiple solutions to classify, label, protect this data? Now, traditionally, the approach to data protection is, hey, let me put something on the firewall so that it can prevent data going out. All right. Let me put something on Office and SharePoint to prevent data and checking on data. Okay. Let me put yet another solution from another vendor on endpoint. Oh, let me put another solution for my on-prem. Let me put another solution because my data is also on Amazon or Azure. So what happens is you are protecting your organization data, but the data is scattered. The data could be in Salesforce. The data could be in a database or a Power BI. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to pick up multiple solutions from multiple vendors and just fixing them or putting them at different places. The challenge is, as you do that, you don't have a single view. There's a lot of duplicacy in policies. You make policy for protecting data on a file server, but that data travels from file server to cloud drive. The data travels from cloud drive to a SharePoint portal server. What if somebody leaks from SharePoint portal server? It's a nightmare then replicating your policy through to different systems, not manageable, and that's what we're trying to address. And as you go into this information protection journey, uh, there are different stops you'll take. Knowing your data is the first stop, protecting your data is second, preventing a data loss is third, and then governing your data is fourth. Now, just for reference again, knowing your data focuses on understanding your data landscape, identifying where all it's kept in hybrid environment. You just are making yourself aware of where the data is. Now that you know where your data is, and obviously in know your data, there would be data classification, which I'll cover in detail. The second thing would be, hey, now I know where my data is. Can I start protecting it? Can I start encrypting it? Can I start ensuring who uses from what media, putting some visual marking that this is sensitive? And once I've done that, hey, it's protected, but what if somebody leaks it? What if somebody leaks it through my machine through a USB, copy it? Hey, what if somebody is a very smart guy? He copied through a Bluetooth device. Okay. Hey, what if somebody is smart? He might open a browser. The browser could be IE, it could be Chrome, it could be any browser. And what this guy is doing is he's uploading the data through the browser to some site. Hey, can I prevent that? He's smart guy. What he's doing is he's opening his Google Drive and then he's using the mouse cursor to shift the files there. Can I protect that? Or he's downloaded a P2P application from a Windows marketplace or some marketplace and then he's trying to upload. Hey, I don't want the people to open it in a different file format and then share it, or in a different application and then share it. Or maybe easiest of all, what he's done is he's picked up some sensitive files and then he's sending it through Gmail or to his Gmail or via Gmail. How do I protect it? So that's where we'll talk about data loss prevention. And then the last would be your governing data. And all of this powered by what we call it as an MIP. The key part of this is, hey, it's a built-in solution. And what I mean by built-in is it doesn't comes with its separate agent. So the issue of deploying agents is taken care of. It's built in within Windows and Office, so it's fairly easy. We call it as MIP. It gives you protection right across Office, Office apps, Power BI, Edge, Windows. It's intelligent. It can do classification, auto classification. It has ML-based trainable classifier. And recently, we also added fingerprinting. We also added EDMs to this. It's also unified, and that's the beauty of it. It's unified, so it gives you a single console so that you can configure, you can manage your policies, you can view analytics, it has alerts, you can view the DLP alerts, which again is a new thing. Uh, Goes all across M365 services, third-party services for Windows and Mac. Mac is a new thing which is coming in a private preview very shortly next week. So that's what covers unified way. It's also extensible. It comes with SDK so that if there are some file formats which are not covered, you have certain drawings, they can also be protected. So pretty much we're looking at a encompass of all the services which your organization play with. And if I have to build a diagram, logical one, it gives you a massive protection unified way across OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams and Azure or Amazon, which I'll just talk in my next slide, through email, through Windows or Mac, which I've given you hint of, through Edge or other browsers, through some apps, MCAS, including if somebody has a report and Power BI, which is used. So pretty much a very comprehensive effort on MIP. Now, the slide I'll build up so that I can explain to you, and there's more like a technical architecture. So the heart of information protection is a classification service. And if you even look your own organization, the first thing that comes to your mind is, hey, what are the kind of stamps I can put on documents? So treat sensitive label as a basic block, which is a stamp that I'm putting on a document. We call it as a label. So once I put a stamp on a document that this is confidential, or this can only float within the organization, or this can only be shared between employees, is the first level of protection. Second is, hey, while I do this, I also want certain kind of sensitive info types, what we call it as. If a document is a credit card number, if a document has a license, if a document is something like an Australian passport number, then I want that document to be tagged separately, monitored separately. Okay. Now we give you out of box hundreds of such sensitive info types so that you don't have to build them. So that's first thing. The second is we also gives you a benefit of creating a custom sensitive info type in various format, in regex, in your own dictionary, in fingerprinting, EDM, as I shared. And then we also have technologies like AI, ML come to our use so that we can have these trainable classifiers, which we can build. So we've given you some out of the box trainable classifiers, but pretty much we can also have some trainable classifiers that we can build out of sample content, which we call it as a seed content. Could be possibly your contract documents, which you want to have the machine do a trainable classifier for, so that your different contracts are then very easily recognized by the system. And if somebody is sending a contract, which by customer would differ with some degree, then the system can pick it, which is a benefit of a trainable classifier. Now, all these will form the heart of, I would say, this classification service. And this means that in my organization, pretty much I can classify the documents if they are sensitive, if they have credit card, if it's a contract document. Yeah, so pretty much I have this sixth sense that I can pick the documents. Now, once I have the sixth sense of picking the document, then what happens is, hey, why not I expose this power to see if something is going from Exchange, if something is getting communicated on Teams or SharePoint or a link. And now what I'm doing is I have this very powerful lens of classification service, which applies on PDF and Word files and other documents. And now what I'm doing is I am just looking at where the documents live and move. I am looking at it across Windows and Mac and iOS. I'm looking at even the applications. If somebody uh, is in Salesforce or ServiceNow, and I have this power of MCAS, and the MCAS now can use the same classification lens and then either block or based on what policies you set. So that's the big picture. Now, not only this classification service gets used by MCAS and other parts of O365, including the endpoint DLP, which I'll explain in coming slides. But this classification service also gets extended to a new service called as Azure Purview, which again uses this lens to see if there is any sensitive information sitting in these assets on Azure or Amazon S3, and then necessary policies can be framed. And the same classification service can also be used by AIP scanner. So we had earlier AIP scanner 1, now we have AIP scanner 2, so that this classification service can also very quickly look into your on-prem assets and then classify them. Now, once I have this very powerful lens which can play around in SaaS services, play around on devices, play around from an endpoint perspective, pretty much I start getting what I say control on my enterprise information landscape, and then necessary policies are there for an organization to protect itself. Also, the same classification service can be used by other services, which I showed you in the big picture, whether it's insider risk, e-discovery, advanced e-discovery, or communication compliance. So they also light up these scenarios for you. So first thing first, as we were on the journey, knowing your data, I should have methods where I can classify my data. How do I classify my data and so on. So we give you built-in classification, 90 plus ways where you can classify your data. Fairly flexible. You can use regex, keywords, EDMs as I shared. It's fairly organized to different industry regulations. So if you want to pick by industry regulation, you can do that as well, so that you don't spend calories in filtering and indexing what all classification types that you would use in that. Again, trainable classifiers, as you see, there are some built-in on trainable classifiers like source code, resumes, offensive language. But we give you a benefit of having a seed value and then also create your own trainable classifier. Now, once you define this, what you'll really be interested in is, hey, can I just on a click go and see what's happening in my organization once I define these identifiers or some AI/ML based classifiers? And what we have done is we've given you this very quick view, I would say, very graphical, very enriched view of where you can have your sensitive data fairly topping up as to what's happening. Uh, and if you look at the numbers below, you have some 9194 files that have been labeled. Some are Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and it also tells you what activities are happening. That, hey, there are some sensitive files or files which have sensitive data. 220 of them got copied to USB. 420 to change a label. Hey, why is somebody changing a label? Now that's something you got to probe. But I'm just giving you how quickly in a gaze it tells you. And it also tells you your top sensitive labels are applied where, or general or confidential. If you made a label like M&A top legal secret and how many documents this is applied. This talks about a different solution, which is retention, where all those files are located from a sensitive label perspective. This was on the retention. And then I'll also share with you some new things like content and activity explorer. Now, once you get this metadata, which I showed, you'll be fairly curious, say what these are. And that's where the friend content explorer comes in. It gives a very clear, a drill down view into what your underlying data is, visibility into the amount of data. You can just go and drill what that is, right? Tell what exactly was the sensitive information that was there, which you see here is a credit card number. It tells you, hey, it is highlighting this confidential, and then you can even do the labeling why it is there. Now, while you can see the content, the other interesting part that you will see is the activity explorer, and it gives you a good understanding of what's happening to your data, where it's going. A view of that was in my first slide, which says, hey, 200 files got copied on USB. Someone is downgrading the sensitivity label. Now, in the Activity Explorer, you can get a lot of details and visibility and then take actions. Here is where you see an Activity Explorer in your subscription. And the way we made is fairly graphical. Let's say these are the files shared externally by whom, copied to USB, the size, the user, what happened, so that it gives you a very deep, enriching view of what's happening in your organization. You can put some filters here, you can select date ranges, you can go to locations, you can do type of files, using what apps and so on. So fairly detailed view in a matter of seconds is what you can get, which improves your ability. And as I shared with you, not only is this MIP classification used for the office, but also the MCAS or the CAS-B uses it, and then you can move some or put some of the policies like send policy match, and it gives you a drop down where you can order it to use the classification service of MIP. And then as you see here, again, you can probably do a query, figure out which was the user, what he did, and so on. Now, once you're in know your data and you have such a visibility to your data that you can find the data, you know what's happening to the data, who's doing it, like I showed you both in the MCAS, adding to that view into again the same portal. The second thing that comes to your mind is, hey, how do I now protect my data? And that's where you'll say, hey, how do I protect my sensitive data? Where can I protect my sensitive data? How do I balance it? And that's again, we've given you a fairly rich experience to protect your data, both where it lives and travels, which means if it's there on SharePoint and you have thousands of files there, you can then apply auto classification or automatically check and label. Or if you have the data which is traveling through different formats, and you can also pick up there. Now you can also secure the data. What all top things come in securing is enforcing a conditional access before the data is accessed, blocking it, encrypting it, putting a label on it, uh, having a separate device policy which can access it, and so on. And from a productivity perspective also, will giving you an option. Either you can manually apply sensitive labels or automatically apply. You can even have recommendation and tool tips coming. You can have visual marking, so that visual marking tells the user what he can or cannot do. The same experience is even applicable on co-author documents. In the search also, if it's a file which you shouldn't have an access to, that gets filtered out. So it also enables the productivity when at the same time your data is secure so that organization risks are managed. So the very quickly I'll also share you the experience of classification, which you see here. Again, you can define these classifications, and the experience you see is same across Windows or Mac, or if you have your Android or iOS devices. So the same experience is what you can get when it comes to classification. Now, you could classify files, but when it comes to containers like teams or team sites, you can also classify them. If you mark them confidential, then it also follows the route where the sensitive information and that could be protected. Now, other than manual classification, you also have automatic classification. You can classify the data automatically, which could be most of the time is data in REST, so that that can also be protected across SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange. And this ensures that your day zero implementation minus the data created before that also gets classified, protected with the sensitive labels that you choose. Now, this is how you pick the auto labeling and classification. You can put that to these assets, give it some time, and then you could even make some policies for SharePoint files and rules so that they can get applied. You can run the policy either in simulation mode, or you could apply it so that you have a view before you turn on the policy. Now, in protect your data, again, there is a lot of kind of previews which we're running given the innovation. So what I've done is given you a quick view of what kind of new things that we've already come out or coming up with. A good thing would be to join these preview programs by going to this link so that our team can continuously update you with the updated information. Now, what we're doing is we're moving to the third block in information protection, which is preventing data loss. And this is a favorite kind of topic because what you want to do essentially, the reason you were discovering data, the reason you were protecting data was so that unwanted data, legitimate data doesn't go into the wrong hands. So almost the DLP in the assessment so far, the DLP leak occurs inadvertently. Uh, Protection without inhibiting productivity is a key ask because if you start making it so cumbersome to share, then it also kind of hinders the productivity of the employees, which is a kind of a balance that you need to make. So the DLP thinking with the engineering is how do we detect, protect, and report very quickly across Teams and SharePoint and Exchange and OneDrive, as I said, across. And from a user experience, how do I ensure I give users enough policy tips? I block sharing, give them a reason why they're doing, let them override if they have to do, send notification emails to the admin so that they're also aware they're getting monitored if they're doing something which the organization doesn't want. Now, the beauty of the DLP from an MIP or the Microsoft Information Protection is it gives you a way from a unified perspective. So once you make a DLP control, it's intelligent that you can probably apply, as you see on your screen, from a single policy. So I could apply to Exchange, to SharePoint, to OneDrive, to Teams chat devices. There's more as you will see in the coming updated revisions of the service. As I enforce my DLP policies, it gives me options like block copying, sharing, sending, block accessing from certain unauthorized apps, automatically encrypting the sensitive files, or scoping policy to certain users, or notifying and educating users and notifying administrator, or monitoring and alerting for policy violation, which includes where you blocked and then alerted. So all of that goes there. And like I said, the beauty of this is that in one shot you could apply, and you saw some new addition here because this screenshot is of a latest service update which I have, while the earlier slide only gave you 3 devices. So I'll again urge you, as more and more innovation keeps in, the logic remains same. Hey, why can't I have just one policy unified on DLP that could get applied all across to different estates where the data is residing on, or could go out or move out either between employees or outside the organization. And that's the super powerful, I would say, capability of the endpoint DLP. As I said, not just endpoint DLP focuses on the assets which are shared earlier exchange. What I've done is from a Teams perspective. So the next slide is of Teams, where even if somebody is sharing some sensitive information on Teams, as you see here, social security number, it just gets blocked. So I'm just bringing the Teams one to, I would say, a quick display here, because today a lot of us do our primary communication work from home on Teams, and it's fairly critical where people today, instead of sending an email, would put a document, put a file on Teams, where Teams would then also have an engine running so that it can block or tell you. So with that, we come to an end to our information protection and governance journey. So I have shared with you, know your data, protect your data, prevent data loss, which are key pillars of the information protection journey. The next stop is govern your data. As I said, this is a separate solution, not covering in the talk today, but happy to have and point you to some resources on govern your data. So with that, we come to an end to this session. I hope you folks are keeping safe in current times. I hope this session gave you a view into both the risk management with Compliance Manager, which is again a new service, and also shared with you the thinking from an engineering perspective on Microsoft Information Protection, broadly protecting information all across and how MIP is becoming the central service across for Windows, Macs, across the Office ecosystem, SaaS services, Azure or Amazon, like I shared with Purview service as central. So I hope and you stay productive, stay safe, and also as you're doing computing from home, you're able to protect the organization, intellectual property, information, sensitive information, and so on. So with that, we come to an end. Thank you for listening and have a good day ahead. Thank you.